We spent about 30 minutes up to this point. We'll finish probably with another 5 minutes.
Okay.
We take that much time with the other two people. Take 20 minutes to set up. Are you going to have time to participate?
Okay, I can probably call home and calm the panic down.
Okay,
You never get over that.
Yeah.
Bill and I still have.
okay, I'm ready. We're rolling.
Dr. Oder, if you could comment on the government industry team, the interaction that occurred and the informality that you touched on a little bit.
Well, in the early days of this program, there weren't separate teams. I mean, the government people, CIA, Air Force, consider themselves part of one activity. The industry people certainly felt that they were a part of the team, and the way the program was managed in the early phases of it, once the go-ahead had been given, once we started having a real program, there would be a monthly meeting, usually out here in the Sunnyvale area, quite often in a secured part of a motel, where Mr. Bissell and a couple of his people, either the technical people or the contracts or the security people, would meet. There would be a few government people from the Air Force, Oz Ritland, sometimes I would come, sometimes Lee Battle would come, depending upon the subject matter, and the contractor people, Jim Plummer and a few others from Lockheed would show. If there was a special subject like the payload, quite often someone from ITEC might be invited. But it would be a meeting of 6-8 people kind of a thing. And it would be a discussion, where are we and where are we going and what decisions have to be made. They would be put on the table, and Mr. Bissell would make the decisions. And then we'd disband and go back and carry them out. And there was, I don't think there was a real good organizational wiring diagram at that time as to how things were put together. That's the way it operated. It's sort of the golden rule. Who has the gold rules, and Bissell had the gold, so he ruled. And beside which, he was an easy guy to work with. I don't remember any serious squabbles of prerogative type coming up during that time at all. By keeping the number of people cleared down to an absolute minimum, it precluded the possibility that there'd be too many players arguing over too few resources. So,
That was good.
once you cut it.
Maybe one more anecdote, kind of a thing, I don't know, lots of mice or something.
Well, why don't you
funny
let Jim tell
Yeah.
that one?
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna.
All right, or any others of.
Anything else we think of? Gosh.
No, I guess not.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about the amount of travel and all of that.
What about the emotion of the success? You talked a little bit about your emotion, the frustration of the failures and all the work you all had to do to prepare. But do you remember how you felt after
Oh,
the
yeah.
process got started and
Oh,
things were
yeah.
going very, very well? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I could, sure. Was success an acceptable thing after all the problems of getting there? Yes, it was. You know, when you've striven for something for a long time and you know that it's going to be accomplished, provided everyone's patient enough with it, and then it actually happens, it's not a letdown, but it's a relief of pressure that makes you feel, what was I so worried about all that time? Here we are doing this thing that I expected we'd be doing all along, and here we are, and it's working. And that's true of a number of programs of this same NRO genre, where the first time you accomplish something, even though you knew you're going to be able to do it, the fact that you did it takes all that pressure off, because you felt the pressure of the importance of doing it. It was important to get reconnaissance photography of the Soviet Union, and that we had pushing us and pulling us all along the way. And until we accomplished that, we really hadn't done what we got sent out to do.
Yeah, that gets helpful.
That
How
was
about
great.
the one about how the program got its name?
How did the program get its name?
Oh, that was, I guess, either that was one of Bissel's people. I guess it was Lloyd or Kuchera, who had, when somebody was looking for a name and he was a cigar smoker and had a Corona cigar, and there was the cigar band was there, and he said, well, why don't we call it Corona? I liked the idea that there was a little old lady in tennis shoes down with a big computer that pulled out these names, but I think that this is probably really what happened, was that somebody just made it up on the spot. That's how it happened.
Good, good.
Okay.
Well, let's break, and maybe we're
Break.
going to go
We're
to,
rolling some more. She said something.
Okay.
Whoops, you
Thank
better.
you, sir.
You
You're
better.
fantastic.
Thank you.
I think what we want to start off with is the question we alluded to, provide your background, how you came into the program, where you were, how your position evolved, and if you just comment on that, I think that would be very useful.
Okay, my background in this particular Corona program came from my early involvement in the Lockheed portion of the job. I participated under Bob Salter, who was a ex-RAND employee that had done a lot of original work on the military uses of satellites. And then he came to Lockheed, and I worked with him as one of his members in writing the Pied Piper proposal. And the Pied Piper proposal was the one that Lockheed did win and later became known as the WS-117L program. On that program, because I had always been a kind of an electronic applications person, I was given the responsibility of the payload management of the payloads of the WS-117L, and we were making some progress on that. When one day my boss at the time, who was Jack Carter, an ex-Air Force colonel, called me into his office and said, "Jim, we want to give you a new assignment if you're willing to accept it." And I said, "Well, sure, you're the boss." And he said, "We want you to leave the plant under a cover story, which we will make up, and go off in another area and start a new program. And this would be a totally covert program." And he says, "You may not talk about this program to anyone, your wife, any of your friends here at Lockheed. You're simply going to disappear." And the cover story was going to be that I was going to become affiliated with the nuclear energy part of the thing, ostensibly a bomb. And so I went and said goodbye to my friends, and I was going to be disappeared, and don't come near me, because I'd probably be radioactive the next time you'd see me. But anyhow, the job was to go off and, in this case, rent a motel room up on the Bayshore, up on El Camino Avenue, and I was given some sketches, very, very rough, non-engineering sketches that were worked up by Amron Katz and Davies from RAND. And this was a system that was essentially a large football, about 4 feet long, 2 feet in diameter, and was to be separated from the WS-117L second stage, which we later called the Agena. And this would be a spinning device and would have within it a panoramic type camera, which was an adaptation of a military camera used on the wing of a Ryan airplane, I believe, and store the film coming through this camera in synchronism with its rotation in a re-entry body, which was to be an adaptation of the sphere, the 18-inch, I think, diameter sphere that General Electric had prepared for the Atlas ICBM re-entry body. Well, that's all we were given, and I was asked to gather together a team and go build it, and negotiate a plant where we could do this fabrication in total secrecy, and we would be directed in the day-to-day work by the Central Intelligence Agency, agents of the CIA. Well, we spent only about 2 weeks in the motel, and in that process had a California flood, which drove us out of our workroom. And we eventually rented a building from the Hiller Helicopter Company up in Redwood City, and we took over the advanced development factory that they had, where they were building some modern versions of helicopters. And we built a small team. We had one instrumentation engineer, one design engineer, a administrator who kind of took care of the contract work, and a crew of people we picked up from Hiller, who were specially briefed and told
Can we
whether to talk
interrupt?
We should
about.
probably cut that,
Yeah.
Can we just start you with, you built a small team and you started to, that's when the beep started to go off.
Oh, what's that beat mean?
It's
Well,
somebody's
It was
beep.
my pager.
Okay.
So can everyone put theirs on vibrate?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Well, at this new plant now, we have this Hiller group of offices and factory space. We built a team of specialists that were required to build this project. And it's interesting to me that we were given 9 months to design and build and launch this particular payload. We were making pretty good headway on figuring out how we would control this football and get the film from the camera into this re-entry sphere and seal up the gap in the ablator, when we were given information that the program was stopped. And this was a big disappointment to us, because we put a lot of work into this rather strange design. And it was a result of work led by Din Land, Dr. Din Land of Polaroid, and the team that he headed up in Washington, D.C., that, along with the Air Force, things that we didn't know, that they were going to redirect the program into a full-scale camera recovery system to be carried by the Agena. So then we started off on a new design. Our directors at CIA had picked the contractors that we were to use. We didn't have that problem of sorting out the contractors. We were given GE, General Electric, as the person to build a different type of a re-entry system, an ablator and a separated shell. And we were given a camera contractor in Fairchild. Our job was to integrate that into a payload system, and then integrate that payload system onto the Agena satellite in what was known as the Discoverer program. So,
Good, good. That's great. I think one of the things we want to comment on now is the cooperation between government and industry. From your perspective in industry, I think that will be a key point that we want to talk about. If you could comment on that.
sure. The relationship we had with our contracting officers, with the technical supervision we had from CIA and the Air Force, was just an outstanding thing. We looked at the arrangement as purely a team effort. There was never any critical comment. There was only constructive comment between the parties to this, and it was this general support and cooperation that we had that really caused the program to go. It was a very, very difficult program, really, if you stop to think at the time. We had to learn how to, with the Air Force portion of the program, the Thor booster and the Agena satellite, we had to learn to go into orbit, get the right velocity and control. And once in orbit, we had to have the basic vehicle, the Agena vehicle, stabilized so that we could run a camera. And then we had to control the power and the thermal design and all of that kind of thing. And then we had to pass the get a camera that would run in a vacuum, in a total high vacuum of space, and make the film work and so forth. And then pass the film into a re-entry body, which could be separated from the Agena in a precise manner so that it would land hit the Earth's atmosphere and land where we could retrieve it. There was great doubt as to whether this device would actually re-enter. People did not know that you could re-enter from space with the velocities that we had. We worked with GE and developed an ablator shell, which did prove to be very successful and turned out to be not much of a real technical problem as time went on. We had lots of problems along the way, and as I had to go to Washington, D.C. with my very close friend, Colonel Lee Battle, who was my Air Force overseer. We had to go to Washington most every week to explain our lack of progress or progress to our various bosses in Washington, D.C. When I would outline the phases of the program that I've pretty much gone through here, the one that they really didn't believe we could ever really do was what we called Air Snatch Recovery. We planned to cause this reentry body to separate from the Agena somewhere in the Alaskan area on a southbound pass, and then it would come into the atmosphere, decelerate, and fall down through the, using its ablator shell to get through the high energy portion, and then separate the inner capsule from the ablator shell and pop out a parachute, and then have an airplane come along and grab it from the parachute. People couldn't believe we could do that. They thought, sure, you can do all that other work, that's just engineering, but to be able to do that was impossible. It turned out to be a great Air Force success. The Air Force was just absolutely masters in flying that airplane and getting picking up the capsule and bringing it home, never having touched the sea. Although we did have some that landed where we didn't want them to, and they hit the earth. But the cooperation between the people was just the most amazing thing. Not only the primary team that we had, Mr. Bissell himself, the deputy director of CIA, would come to all of the meetings along with John Parangosky and Gene Kiefer. Colonel Lee Battle was there, and General Ozzie Britland and Colonel Harry Evans were the primary people who gave the direction. The meetings were very simple. There was no oversight. There were no technical second opinions ever. We were told to go ahead if we thought we were right and do it, and eventually it did work. In Washington, we got great support. As I'm sure most everybody knows, we had 12 so-called failures. We call them pretty much engineering successes, while we were learning to do all these various phases. But the people in Washington, up to and including President Eisenhower, did support us, and we had no lack of funding or lack of support. And of course, we eventually were successful, and everybody was very happy, as we were.
That's great. That's super.
Very good.
We were talking out in the hallway about the security cover and the biocide mission, mice. Well, let's capture that
Oh, you hear something?
Okay.
as an anecdote as soon as they're ready here. Are we okay? You ready?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the mice story.
Okay. Well, while we were working on this primary issue of developing a camera and recovery of film from space, it was obvious that we had to have some sort of a cover story. And the cover story was invented by the CIA experts. And it was decided between CIA and the Air Force that the best thing would be to tie it into the biomedical situation for the eventual application of man or living bodies in space. The plan was that we would, in the size of our device, we could be reasonable in saying we could fly a rhesus monkey. A rhesus monkey is a small, very intelligent little monkey from India, which the Indians dearly love. And we were to learn to fly a rhesus monkey in a spacesuit and put him in orbit and bring him back. And also, as a second mission, we were to fly white mice. We were to fly 4 white mice at a time and take care of them in orbit with the proper feeding and watering and all of that. While they were instrumented, each mouse wore a little vest. The monkey had a complete astronaut suit on. But the mice, we couldn't do that, so we had, in a little device built by General Electric, we had the mice with a little vest that measured their respiration and heartbeat, and then transmitted that within this little cage to a little telemeter pickup, a little radio pickup, and then that would go into the recorder and eventually to be available to the biomedical people as to what was going on. So we actually were prepared to fly both rhesus monkeys, and we went through all the designs and all of the testing, and we were prepared to do that. I don't know the technical detail or the precise details to how it fell apart, but it really was that the Indian government took exception to us flying a rhesus monkey, because that's a holy mammal in that country, I take it. So we all of a sudden we found our rhesus monkey experiments to be canceled. So then we were confined only to mice, and nobody really cared too much about mice, I guess. Although I do remember one time, and this was a very, very interesting story to me, we had a perfect setup. We had already pretty much proven all of the phases of orbiting and control, recovery, and so forth, but we hadn't accomplished recovery yet. And we were prepared to launch 4 white mice, fully instrumented and everything working perfectly. At the 11th hour, the night before launch, we got the word from Washington, I guess General Schriever, take out the mice, that they'd had people who were concerned about the cruelty to animals. And the statement was, we don't think the Air Force should launch white mice until you have proven recovery, so you have a chance to get them back alive. So at the 11th hour, we had to go in to the capsule, take out the mice, but we still wanted to exercise our instrumentation. So I had a very, very excellent technician working for me, Stan Hall. And I said, get something that will simulate a mouse. So he overnight built 4 little mechanical mice. And these little mechanical mice were wrapped in the vest, and they transmitted simulated heart and respiration data. Well, everything went fine in the orbit. Everything was working fine with the mice. The mice were alive. The mechanical mice were alive. And there was a mistake made in the Hawaii tracking station. We had a mechanical timer on the satellite in those days rather than the computer type we have nowadays, but this mechanical timer could be advanced or set back, and the frequency of it could be changed so to match the orbit. Well, a man hit the wrong button, and he put the entire satellite out of sync with its position on Earth. We had a perfect separation. The capsule re-entered, and it landed in up in north of in the Arctic Circle anyhow. And we believe that the Russians picked that up. We dispatched a man, one of our people went flying up there, Colonel Moose Matheson, 45 strapped on his hip, and when he got there he found reports that the satellite, that the orange and gold parachute with a gold ball hanging on the end of it had landed, and there were icebreaker tracks going in there, and so we really think that the Russians picked that up. Must have been fun when they opened it up and found mechanical mice.
You gotta be quiet.
Let's see. Yeah, that's a great story. Would you feel comfortable talking about how things have changed, the way that the program was managed, both from a program office standpoint and from the Washington perspective, compared to today? Is that something?
There are great differences in the way the program was managed in its later phases compared to the start, and there are even greater changes in the way programs are managed today. When we started out, as I've described, we had a very, very few people overseeing us, and we had the top people. Like Mr. Dick Bissell would come out, and he was the highest level person we had, and decisions were made at that level. When I set up this new facility, I was asked to emulate the very successful skunk works that Kelly Johnson of Lockheed had used for the U-2 and the SR-71 and programs of that type. So I became known as the manager of the Northern Skunk Works, and we did that with very, very little oversight and direct control. Later in the program, more people were briefed, and the more people you brief, the more people you have to continue to brief, and so you get less individual control. We started out with the objective of designing and building and launching in 9 months, and we did that. Nowadays, I'm told it's up in 9 years or 15 years before you develop a program of that kind of magnitude. So we had no overseers. I'm not saying the oversight is bad, because I think that having been the chairman of the board of Aerospace Corporation, I can't say that aerospace hasn't made many contributions to this system. But in the early days they weren't there. And today they are there. The programs are much longer. The programs are much more expensive. You just can't take the chances today that we took in those days. For example, I really don't think you could do Millstar, a very complicated program, on the same basis that we did Corona.
That's good. very, very succinctly, very well.
We have 5 minutes left on this particular tape.
Okay, Bill, some of the other things that we might want to capture, you've been reviewing that some specific.
Yeah.
We want to talk a little bit, if we touched on the streamlined approach.
Coming off what we just talked about, how about the question of, could we do a program like this again today, in today's environment? If somebody said there's high priority, I want you to go off and we're gonna make you disappear again, and we want something in 9 months, could this happen again?
Could we do this kind of a program today, that is a 9-month development of a special thing? I really think so, if you would put such security on the thing that you could keep all of the outsiders out of it. I am totally convinced that the engineers are smart enough to do it, and I'm also convinced that the individuals in the CIA and in the Air Force could run the program. It could be done. Technically, it's easily done. Kelly Johnson proved that on the U-2. We proved it on the Corona program. It could be done today. The kind of technical programs I think you might design today might be more complicated than what we had to do. Ours was fairly, even though it was early days of space, really pretty straightforward engineering for most of the problems we had. But it could be done if you put the right constraints on it. And you must have streamlined management. And I also believe that you should have something that in there that would incentive contracting, to make the contractor really work hard to do the job and get some incentive for doing a good job. And of course, to a contractor, incentive means profit. But it could be done if it had proper controls on it. When we worked on the Corona, we had no congressional oversight. We had nobody looking over our shoulder. Nowadays, all these programs have congressional oversight, congressional staff oversight. They have the staffs in CIA, they have big staffs in the Air Force. Bigger programs requiring more oversight, but you could do a program if you wanted to. Another U2, or something of that type.
Okay, good. So you're down to.
I have about 2 more minutes left on this tape. We should probably do a quick switch here.
Okay.
Colonel, Mr. Palmer, you already talked a bit about